All right, this is Rome's Rise, Part 2, and we're at the slide called End of the Republic. So this is a continuation from the previous one. And what we've got to look at now that Rome has conquered most of the Mediterranean world, a big chunk of, Spain, Italy, of course, chunk of North Africa, Greece, parts of the Middle East. They dominate 80% of the Mediterranean. They control these provinces, and it's going to completely change the functioning of Rome. And what happens here is most of the benefits of conquest go to the patricians, right? The people who run the Senate, the wealthy generals and governors of new provinces and so forth. And these ones get the positions of wealth. They get the land, they get the slaves, they get the wealth. And so we're getting conquest is massively benefiting the people at the top, while the people at the bottom, often the plebeians, they're often the ones who are killed or lose their land. And you're getting an increase in the number of landless poor plebeians, which means they lose their rights of citizenship, right? As they are squeezed out, and as the patricians getting more and more of the wealth and buying out plebeians and dispossessing them and so forth. And of course, outside of Italy, the patricians have run everything. And one of the things you get is this enlargement of land ownership, in that you get the beginning of the great slave plantation, which you use in a modern term, what in Latins were called latifundia, which means big farm. So the latifundia are where the patricians, especially using slaves from conquered territories, have these huge latifundia, huge plantations with often hundreds and hundreds of slaves, or at a minimum dozens and dozens, that are working the land. Okay, and so you get a slave economy. Slavery has been a huge part of the Greek system, where you'd have maybe 30 to 50% of the population were great slaves. Similar in Rome. But really now, because of the number of slaves from conquests, the land especially, which may have been more worked by peasants in the past, and slaves did more industry and so forth, you now have the great era of the slave plantation. So it is even more of a slave economy than ever, and your poor farmers are getting pushed out. And it's going to create a massive crisis between the plebeians, who are being made poor, and the patricians, who are getting all the wealth and power. And when you get a split in inequality, with one going down and one going up, you're going to get a very nasty situation. And that's a historical commonality that is true to today. All right, so to the next slide, the first triumvirate. What we get is, during the 1st century BC, there was a lot of violence as plebeians demand to maintain their citizenship, to be able to hold their land, to get a share in the conquest, and the patricians in trying to keep them off. There's assassinations, there's military dictators. It's a brutal several decades in the 1st century BC, as this massive inequality in wealth and power turns politics very violent. I decided not to go into great detail on that. There's some you can read, but it's brutal. But what takes us to the end of the Republic is the attempt at compromise by the Romans, where they'll set up a triumvirate. So I'm at the first triumvirate, and literally triumvirate means 3 men. Virate of men, three. First triumvirate. So a group of 3 men are basically put in charge of the Roman government. Okay, one of them is a successful general named Julius Caesar. The other one is another successful general named Pompey, both of whom were famous for their conquests. And then the wealthiest man in Rome, representing the elite patrician class, is Crassus. Now, the idea is these have different networks of support and friends and allies, and if the three can work together, they could pull Rome together. It fails miserably. They begin raising armies, and they begin looking to get more power than each other. The Romans are about as bad as the Greeks for just trying to beat each other and be in power. Crassus will be the first to go. He's actually going to try and attack Persia to give himself military fame to equal Pompey and Caesar. He's not a general. He's killed. His army is defeated. End of Crassus. Caesar and Pompey will go into a civil war, which Caesar will win. Pompey will flee to Egypt and ask for the pharaoh of Egypt. Remember, this is a Greek dynasty. It's the Ptolemies, and his name's Ptolemy. Okay, he'll ask the leader of Egypt, this Greek ruler, if he could stay there in exile. But Ptolemy's like, no, I'm not going to take off Caesar. So he kills Pompey, hoping to please Caesar. But Caesar's mad. You don't kill a Roman if you're not a Roman, right? Yeah, okay, Pompey's my enemy, but he's still a Roman, and you're Greek, you don't kill Romans. So Caesar uses Ptolemy's murder of Pompey to attack Egypt. And remember, Egypt at this point is independent. And what happens is Ptolemy's sister Cleopatra allies with Caesar, brings in Egyptians. In exchange, by bringing this Egyptian support for Caesar as he invades, they can get rid of Ptolemy and she can become the Queen of Egypt and a friend and ally of Caesar. And Caesar's like, that's cool. So they make an alliance. Ptolemy is killed. His sister Cleopatra is now Queen of Egypt, remember, and she's Greek. And then she has this brilliant plan, and I love this. Now, what we have here, Cleopatra is the last of the independent Hellenistic rulers. Right? The Romans have conquered the Antigonids and the Seleucids and all those other neighboring kingdoms. Egypt is the last Hellenistic kingdom with Greek rulers, and Cleopatra is the last one. But what she's doing is she's going to make a bid for power. She does seduce Caesar. They have 2 children, but he's married. And what her goal is to have him divorce his wife, marry Cleopatra, and then you have an alliance of the Romans and the Greeks, a Roman emperor and a Greek queen. She would have all the Hellenistic Greeks would be supportive of this empire rather than just being resentful of their conquest by the Romans. They'd be like, okay, yeah, one of ours is co-ruler. She could promise the Greek East as friends and allies rather than as a conquered people. It's tempting. Caesar is reluctant to divorce his wife. That would be politically a bad idea, especially to marry a Greek. So it's maybe. But before anybody can figure it out, now that Caesar is the single survivor of the triumvirate and has become a dictator, he will be assassinated by members of the Senate who do not want a dictator. The leader of this group is a man named Cicero, a politician, who wants to keep the old republic. So Caesar is assassinated, and Cleopatra's plan is foiled, and we're back to square one with Rome. So next slide, this is the last in this group, the second triumvirate. The Romans are quite persistent. We're going to try again with 3 new men. One of them is Octavian, who is Caesar's nephew and has been decided to be Caesar's heir. The other one is Mark Antony, a very successful and popular general who had served under Caesar. So theoretically, Octavian and Mark Antony should be friends. Caesar's nephew and one of Caesar's favorite generals. And then Lepidus is taking Crassus's position as a representative of the elite wealthy. It fails miserably. Okay, what happens is basically Octavian bribes Lepidus to go retire or die. Lepidus takes the bribe and retires. He's not a soldier. And Octavian and Mark Antony begin raising armies, just like Caesar and Pompey did a decade before. So once again, it's like, we can't work together. One of us has to be in charge. Octavian, being Caesar's heir, is able to get a lot of support and political influence in Italy and the West. So Mark Antony goes east. He goes to the Hellenistic East part of the empire, and he's looking for soldiers and support and money there to increase his army. So Octavian's building up an army in Italy. Mark Antony goes east. And as Mark Antony is raising troops and money, he goes to visit his old friend Cleopatra in Egypt. He knew her because he was one of Caesar's generals. So she's a friend and ally. And so he's like, hey, maybe Cleopatra will give me money and soldiers. Which she proves willing to do. But she's going to do more than that, because she still has her plan. If I can get Mark Antony to divorce his wife and marry me, we'll have, and we beat Octavian, we'll have the Roman leader and the Greek queen, and plan B. Cleopatra's fantastic, right? Brilliant. She's taking advantage of this Roman civil war. The fact that she's a woman means she's only limited in how she can do things. The fact that the Romans are far stronger than Egypt means she can't just, go to war. So what's she do? She's going to seduce what looks like the most powerful Roman, marry them, become the queen of Roman Empire. It's brilliant. Problem is, Octavian defeats Mark Antony, which is a bit of a surprise. Octavian's young and less experienced a general than Mark Antony. It is a bit of a surprise, but Octavian proves to be brilliant, and he has some good help from his generals. And Mark Antony is defeated and killed. Well, actually commits suicide to avoid capture. And Octavian shows up at Alexandria in Egypt, where Cleopatra is with his army, and Cleopatra is sort of, right, she's asked to negotiate a surrender. Probably she wouldn't survive. They're not going to want someone who supported Mark Antony in power. Maybe she'll be killed, or who knows what. Interestingly enough, Octavian never meets her in person. He refuses to negotiate in person. My belief, and the Romans report that she commits suicide to avoid surrender, which is probable. But I have a theory, and I'm not the only one with this theory, that Octavian refused to meet Cleopatra because he was afraid she'd seduce him. And so one possibility is he actually had her poisoned. Probably she poisoned herself to avoid capture, but it's an interesting little theory. Octavian is the only one left, and he goes back to Rome, and he is the dictator for life. I forgot to mention Cicero. I see him on the slide. Cicero, who had led the faction who had killed Caesar, he's put to death by Octavian. No opposition. No opposition. And actually, people are so tired of civil wars, not only from the Second Triumvirate and the First Triumvirate, but from all the bloodshed from the various patricians and plebeians fighting in the decades ahead. There'd been decades of on and off conflict and bloodshed and assassinations and murders and civil wars. So when Octavian wins and right, has Cicero and other people killed, it's like, yeah, fine. As long as you keep the peace and we're no longer, and we're happy. He changes his name to Augustus, which means the Great One. So Octavian is Augustus, and Augustus is considered the first Roman emperor. And he takes the title, he doesn't take the title Rex, which means king. He does not take the title. Romans are a republic, no kings. So he takes the title Imperator, which basically means commander-in-chief. That's why it's called the Roman Empire, because it's where the imperator has his imperium, or his rule or power. And princeps, which means first citizen. Okay, modest title, commander and first citizen. he's essentially a dictator. But people are like, we have peace, we have stability, and we have this bloody great big empire. If you look at the red, some of the bits in Britain and Northern Gaul aren't part of the empire yet, but essentially we have conquered the entire Mediterranean world, and we have peace and stability. Everything's good. And that would be the end of that slide show.